All right, so thanks to Adrian. I don't have to be the person who says cyber first tonight, which means he has to do my drinks for me, because I'm going to say cyber a few times. There we go. We're getting set up here. So thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I'm very honored to be the first person to speak to you other than Adrian at this event, and I'm happy to be the first person speaking at the first community night at 44Con. I'm going to talk a little bit about the I Am The Cavalry initiative. Just by show of hands, and I'm a little bit blinded here, but how many people have heard of I Am The Cavalry? Okay, good. Probably 30% or so. So I'll go through a quick overview, and it'll be very quick. For those of you who don't know about what's going on, you'll be able to find out. Then recap what we call year zero, because we're all computer people in here, right? We understand that 0 is the first number. Then what's the next year going to look like? And finally, kind of introduce our 5-star auto cyber safety framework. And now I've said cyber for the first time in the talk, so it's a good time to get started. So I Am The Cavalry. For those who haven't been around, haven't seen it, the idea started from the problem statement that our society is adopting connected technology faster than we can secure it. And what that means is that we're kind of plugging in a bunch of different devices that didn't used to have computers in them and that didn't used to be connected to the internet. Now they are. And so what does that mean? Our mission statement then is to ensure that connected technologies with the potential to impact public safety and human life are worthy of our trust. And we thought that that part was really especially grabbing because most of the people out there who are not in this room are putting their trust in these technologies whether or not we feel like they're worthy of that. So what we wanted to do was to kind of rectify the trust that's being placed in them with the trust that they deserve. We focus on 4 critical areas: medical devices, automotive, connected home, and then public infrastructure. And again, these are all things that have the potential to impact human life and public safety in those areas. So where somebody might lose medical data, that's not necessarily what we're concerned with. We're concerned with the device itself potentially killing someone or doing something negative to impact their life. Why we want to do this, again, should be clear from the problem statement, from the mission statement, and the devices that we're looking at. It's really to ensure trust, to ensure a high level of public safety and a preservation of human life. And we do this primarily through education, outreach, and through supporting research. And I think that those are 3 key ingredients to kind of call out, is we don't want to necessarily do the research ourselves. We want to allow other people to be better at doing the research that they're already doing, to take the research that's already been done and connect it to others who can benefit from it. And we see outreach as a key part of that, going outside of the echo chamber and the security community and industry and into the manufacturing industries, into the public policy arenas, into the legal areas, and helping them understand what cybersecurity really means in these aspects. We are a global grassroots organization. We have several folks who are on our discussion list who are in Europe, not too many in Asia, but a few. Not too many in other geographies, but we are growing and trying to expand, again, outreach, trying to get out there, get the word out. And we are primarily made up of people from the InfoSec industry, the InfoSec community, security researchers, right? The people in this room. So you are the target group that we need as resources to help make the world a better place. And hopefully that doesn't sound too much unicorns and rainbows. And we really want to have a long-term vision for what cyber safety means. So it's one thing to fix a particular vulnerability, such as the Heartbleed vulnerability. It's another thing to make sure that those types of issues don't come up in devices that we depend on and rely on. And if they do, that they are fixable. So that if you have an MRI machine that costs 10 million pounds to procure, that you don't have to either throw that away and buy a new one, or look at just going with a completely vulnerable, exposed piece of equipment for the rest of its expected lifetime. And the way that we're doing this is we're looking at collecting existing researchers and work that's been done. This is extremely helpful in making sure that the next bit of research that's done is maximally effective, so that you don't have to go back and relearn how to decode the protocol that's being used, for instance, so that you can continue on with the research you want to do. That's already been done before. Someone knows how to do it. It's important to connect those folks together, connect the past work that's been done, connect the output of certain research to the people that it affects, whether that's public policy makers, whether that's the manufacturers themselves, whether that's a healthcare procurement organization. We want to connect those people together. We also want to collaborate with all of these different stakeholders. Bring them together in a room and have them talk out the issues. If you go, as we have, and talk with a lot of the manufacturing organizations, sometimes they know a lot of the issues that we're bringing to them. It's not a matter of them not knowing. It's a matter of maybe them not being able to get that safety feature done. If you bring public policy makers into the room, sometimes they can help get that done in a better way. So bringing all those folks together, you catalyze action before it might have happened otherwise. So one of the things that we kind of fear is, I won't say Cyber Pearl Harbor, because that's overused, but in the 1970s, there was a river in the United States called the Cuyahoga River. And if you don't know, that river caught on fire several times. Now just imagine the scene of a body of water burning, and you can imagine how bad the pollution was. That situation kicked off the American environmental protection groups, and it was a heavy reaction to an environmental problem. It was a situation where the issues had gotten way past the point of a reasonable, rational solution implemented over time. It was something that had to happen and had to be a heavy reaction. If we're able to make these good things come out of what we're doing sooner, then we avoid those overreactions. And the whole idea is that if the cavalry isn't coming, if no one's coming to solve these problems, we have to stand up and be the people to solve it. I am the cavalry is not I am the cavalry. It's all of us. We are all the cavalry. So to recap, kind of year zero, it all started at B-Sides Las Vegas and DEF CON last year, 2013. That was when Josh Corman, Nick Percoco got up. They gave an initial talk to try and pull together people who were like-minded, who were interested in the same things, and who believed that they could make a difference, that they needed to make that change, that they needed to be the leaders. They outlined 3 planks of the basic platform. Body is public good and public safety, the idea that medical devices, cars, these other things could actually have a kinetic impact. They could hurt, harm, kill people. Another area was the mind, and primarily this was around criminalization of research. In the US, there are some pretty draconian laws that are really just outdated. They're from like the 1980s regarding things like authorized versus unauthorized use. And those laws are shutting down, or in many cases, stifling and silencing researchers who are trying to act in good faith. So the idea was we have to safeguard our right to research. And then soul, civil liberties, the Snowden stuff that Adrian talked about to start the show off. These are things that impact us, that reach really deeply into the roots of what it is to be human. And going back to like Hobbes and Locke and these really enlightened thinkers of the 1700s, they defined some of these things that are now shifting, and they're changing for the better or for the worse based on technology. And again, one thing was clear when we looked around we realized that there weren't a lot of people talking about this, that there wasn't anybody really in charge of making sure that these things didn't really harm us, our society, and our individuals. So it falls to us, and again, it falls to you. And they introduced I Am The Cavalry. The goals, what we wanted to start to do, was to do feasibility testing. Is this something that's going to work? I don't know. Maybe nobody's ever tried this before. Maybe they have. Maybe we'll find that, just by talking about it, there's this whole body of work that's been done that people will point us to, and we can say, all right, well, somebody's working on this. We don't necessarily need to exist. We wanted to fail fast and iterate. We wanted to find out what didn't work as well as what did work, repeat the things that worked well, and discard the things that didn't. We wanted to make sure we fully understood the problem space, talking to people in industry so we could understand their perspective, understanding what we call the chain of influence is, so that we could map it out, know what we needed to do, how to affect that change to get the result that we ultimately wanted to see. We also wanted to gather like-minded people together, folks like ourselves, folks who thought we could do something to make a difference, maybe frustrated with our day jobs because we felt like it wasn't important enough, or that it didn't solve some of the most important critical problems. It was only trying to stop a credit card from getting breached, which was going to happen anyways. And we wanted to form plans for how we took this action, how we move forward, what's the best way to actually impact the change that we want to see. So in year one, we did a lot of talking to people. I've had dozens, maybe hundreds of phone calls with folks, met them in person, talked to people at conferences like this. Again, this is the outreach and the education piece of how we're going to accomplish this. We found that there were a lot of people who were just like us, who saw these issues, who knew that something had to be done, and who wanted to jump on board and make sure that it wasn't a critical issue that had a long-lasting negative problem, that it got fixed before that happened. We also, again, went and investigated the research community. We found a lot of people that have been researching these issues, right? In automotive space, it's not just Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek. It's Don A. Bailey, who's talking here at this conference as well. It's several other folks who are really shy and quiet a lot of times. They don't go speak at industry events. There's a guy, Craig Smith, he runs a small group called Open Garages. It's just a bunch of hackers who like to get together, tinker with cars. He's one of the smartest guys in the automotive space that I think I know, because he can explain things so well to an audience that's not security people, because that's who he's been working with. We found multiple examples like that where it was quiet people who wouldn't stand up and talk at a conference, but they had a lot of the knowledge. They knew what was going on, and they were very, very powerful allies and folks to get to know. The government in the US, that's kind of a dirty word right now, but we found a lot of really good people in government even. People who were policymakers, people who were in regulatory agencies, people who may be doing different things, maybe in the Defense Department. We found really good folks, really good connections that helped us understand more of the lay of the land when you get into that area, which is something that, frankly, most of us, probably most of you in this room, don't know the government space very well. Some of you may, but I'll tell you, I didn't before we started talking to these folks. We also found that manufacturing industries, the target organizations, were really receptive to this in a lot of ways. We've talked to probably just about every car maker you can think of, many of the medical device makers. We've had a lot of traction in those two areas, and it's been really, really good, really positive. I can only think of maybe one or two calls that I've had or discussions that I've had that didn't, at the end of it, have some positive next step or positive action to come out of it. Sometimes they were a little bit afraid to engage because they weren't sure where we were coming from. Are you guys just a bunch of hackers who are going to try and make me look bad in front of my boss? We had to overcome that stereotype a little bit, but it wasn't hard. Once we started talking to them, They were people, we're people. We talked to the press quite a bit. It was a story that was pretty compelling and engaging, and there's some press people maybe in this room right now, but certainly at this conference, who have engaged with us, wanted to learn more, wanted to talk about it, because it's something that's important. It has a good angle from a public relations standpoint, and they helped get the message out. They helped us get the message out to many of the people who we wanted to talk to, who otherwise we couldn't have gotten an audience with. We had several manufacturers, public policy makers, lots of people call us up, write us emails and say, hey, I saw your story in the newspaper. I want to know more. What can I do to help? I want to engage with you. That was really, really good, very positive. And then we had several deliverables that we were able to get out. I'll talk about one of those later on in the talk, but it was the open letter and 5-star automotive cyber safety framework. That was a really good positive thing that fed back into the press, and we were able to get a lot of car makers that called us up on the phone and wanted to talk. We got a lot of good feedback. We also had several workshops, a couple of opportunities to sit down and go through some of the issues that we're facing and have the community tell us what their opinions were, get a diversity of opinions. Those came through in some of our positions. We put out a website that, if you haven't seen it, it's IamTheCavalry.org, and you can go there and see some of our position statements, some of the directions that we've taken. There's a lot of good thinking, a lot of good content that's starting to be generated by the work that we've done over the past 12 months. In terms of conference activities, you can see here we've been to a lot of different conferences. We've talked to a lot of different folks. Just a few highlights really quickly. B-Sides DEF CON last year, that was where the concept was introduced. At DerbyCon, which is a conference that takes place in Louisville every year, we had a 2-day congress where we got a bunch of security researchers together. A lot of people flew into Louisville not to go to the conference, but to sit in a room with a bunch of stinky geeks for a couple of days and try and flesh this out and figure it out. There was a TEDx, and if you don't know what TED is, it's a very, very broadly watched series of short presentations to a general audience. That was a way for us to really get outside of the echo chamber, to talk to people, and what we found is that they were very receptive to the message. You can go out and watch that. That's one done by Josh Corman in Naperville, Indiana, I believe. At ShmooCon, we held another day-long symposium, just again, getting folks together. What can you contribute? What do you know that we don't know? How can we refine and polish our message? And we had some of smart folks from government circles, from inside the Beltway, as we call it in the US, who really knew that space well, and a lot of them had been funded by research grants from the government to go and work on these things, from aviation standpoint or automotive standpoint or Internet of Things, because the government does recognize that this is one of those fringe areas that's growing. We went and we were invited by RSA to come and have a booth there. We got a booth in their emerging technologies and emerging projects area, and it was really good. We were there for 3 days, and that was great. At B-Sides San Francisco, we held another 2-day workshop to bring the security community in San Francisco in. They had a lot of crazy ideas, as you will out in San Francisco, but some of them were really good, and we incorporated a lot of the information we got. At ThoughtCon and B-Sides Chicago, each of these, we ran a workshop for several hours a day, 3 to 4 hours at each one of those events. We were able to, again, get people in the room, talk about the issues, and have some good output from that. Just recently, at the 1-year anniversary, we were back out at B-Sides Las Vegas. We did an event that was a day-long event, bringing in security people at B-Sides and talking about some more non-technical skills, non-technical muscles that we need to build in order to make sure that our message gets out and is effective, so that we're not speaking in geek language, we're speaking in the language that the recipient needs to hear it in order to make that impact. We also were at DEF CON. We did an invite-only event where we got a bunch of car makers, a bunch of security researchers, medical device makers, Internet of Things, and public infrastructure folks in the same room And the biggest thing we learned was they already knew the issues, they already knew that they needed solutions, but it was making the connections that was really, really helpful to that group. It was an excellent event, and we hope to recreate it at least once or twice over the next year. So what worked well? What did we learn? We found that our problem statement and our mission statement went over really, really well with most people. We weren't sure whether it was going to fall on deaf ears, but it turns out it didn't. Turns out most people, when we spoke clearly and in a general language, even, like my hairdresser knows now that this is an issue. Public policymakers. I've explained this to my mom, and if anybody can get anything, she's the last person I can usually reach, and she understood why it was needed. We also found that the timing was really fortuitous. A lot of people have tried similar things in the past, but just the timing hasn't been there. And we had a lot of people coming to us saying, look, you guys, you're going to crash and burn. I don't want to see that happen to you. I said, well, we'll try it anyways. We'll fall on our face and we'll get back up maybe and go do something different. But as it turns out, a lot of people, it was just that moment, that right moment, to be able to hear it and to accept it. Collecting, connecting, collaborating, catalyzed. I already mentioned what that is. We discovered that as we went through it, we needed different roles, even among ourselves, right? If there's somebody who's out there doing research, that's great. But when he goes and presents that research to a manufacturer, they yell at him, they tell him he's a horrible person for making all these problems for them, somebody needs to be there to pick him up, to make sure that he doesn't quit what he's doing, that he's encouraged by any forward progress. So we found that, and there was a great presentation that a guy named Brian Kiefer, he goes by Chort Zero on Twitter, he did out at B-Side San Francisco, and as well at DerbyCon. And it was on comparing World of Warcraft guilds to what we do. So you start out in World of Warcraft and you're going to do the learning module. You get up to a certain point and then you can go out into the world and you can start doing things solo. Once you get done with that, you can't progress unless you team up with somebody else to trade, to go and fight together, and then you can get to a certain level. After you get to that level, you really can't go any farther unless you have a guild, unless you have a group of people that work together for a common goal and mission and can take on roles of each other and whatever needs to be done. So that was something that really was, it seemed to have worked well when we got together and did that. We also went and we sought out other people to make us smarter. We went to the automotive industry and we talked to them and they told us that their problems were. Sometimes there were problems that we didn't know that they had, that we just assumed that they were dumb, right? But we found out that they were smart, but that we didn't know what their problems were. We talked to people who were doing research in the medical device field. We found out that they actually knew a lot. They knew a lot of people. They knew a lot of the problems, but they needed someone else who could help them do something else with it. We got lots of really good outside interest, feedback, and participation from people we wouldn't have expected necessarily. So going into the Senate staff, finding some really smart people about 25 to 30 who generally we always think that the Senate staff is old folks who don't understand technology. Found some really good people who do understand technology at a level that's actually surprisingly detailed and surprisingly effective. We found a lot of good people out there willing to come to us to help make the situation better. Where did we fall on our face? And we did quite a lot. We had a really broad initial scope, the body, mind, soul. What we found is that when we started talking about the criminalization of research, the right to research, there were already some organizations working on it. It was already something that was known as a general problem, not just among us, but also among some of the folks in legislature and the legal practice. In the civil liberties arena, we found that there were tons of people working on it, especially post-Snowden. Everybody came to realize that this was a civil liberties problem. And so where we were going to contribute our time and energy, that was just going to either get in the way or not contribute as meaningfully and as impactful. So we went and shortened that, condensed it down to just the body aspect: public safety, human life. We also had some fairly bad project management. We've all got day jobs, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing is nights and weekends, and as such, we dropped a bunch of threads. So if you've sent us emails or reached out for contact or had a project and we didn't get back to you, or it kind of fell by the wayside, I apologize. Come back to us, help us work it out again. We want to keep going. We had some really not so great communication. One of the things that we say we need to do better is to communicate with others, to talk about what we're doing, to share what we know. And then we got so wrapped up in doing things that we forgot to talk about what we'd been doing. And we really want to improve that in this next coming year. We initially had some folks who were going into Congress and getting access to the congressional staffers to try and plead the case on especially right to research. We found that when we went into them and said, hey, listen, we have people who are going to jail for finding legitimate vulnerabilities and acting in good faith with the manufacturers, said, I've got a budget crisis, I've got wars going on, I've got all these other things. You sound like you're just whining, right? What do I care? We found that if we went in instead with the public safety, human life message, that they were actually really eager to listen. And then after we got done demonstrating that there was a problem to solve, and they said, how can we help? Then we could bring in the criminalization of research, the right to research. And that was very, very effective, that kind of 1-2 combination. It helped us be better than we would be alone. And the name. We've had countless times of explaining, what does I Am the Cavalry mean? Is it, you're gonna save us all? Is it, what is the cavalry? Are you guys gonna shoot us, ride horses, like what? No, the idea is, if no one else is coming to do this, if no one's gonna come in and save us, then we have to stand up and save ourselves. It's a very American-specific reference and metaphor. It might work a couple of other places, but we found that we got a very mixed reception, especially across Europe and Asia. So we'll probably be working on doing something about that. We found that there were a lot of things we didn't know going into this. We were maybe a little bit naive, but we knew that we were naive and we were open to learning. We were happy to learn. So we found that a lot of the things we needed to be doing, we didn't really know how to do. Katie Mazuris, for instance, convinced us that one of the things that was really missing and necessary was empathy. The ability to listen to people and understand their perspective in order to make your argument or your case stronger. When you go in and talk to a medical device manufacturer and you listen to why they're not making security a better, a stronger feature, they really have some good reasons, such as if they did that, they might not be able to sell that product anymore, which sounds kind of screwed up, but there are certain realities that they have. If they change a product too much and add security, they have to go through the revetting process, which means that for the next 6 to 9 years, they can't sell that product. So you have a situation where there's a life-saving product out there, and because there's maybe a default password in it, it's not going to be saving lives for 6 to 9 years. That's not a real reality. I mean, that's costing lives. It's doing the opposite of what we're trying to do. That was a big surprise. Understanding that being able to speak clearly and concisely to non-technical people, that was a huge thing that we need to learn and get better on. So as we're going through, we're actually trying to help folks build those muscles. At B-Sides Las Vegas, that was what the entire day was about, trying to give insight onto putting together a cogent presentation, on being able to understand the public policy frameworks that are out there so that you can engage with them in the right way. One of the things we found too is that when we built those muscles to get better at this, we also got better at our day jobs. Now, you can put together a business case. You can speak to an executive in a language that they understand. So it's kind of a synergistic overlap with what we do for money and what we do for doing the right thing. Taking some different approaches than we typically take in this, inside the echo chamber, as we say. You know, we tend to be pretty down on people. Oh, this will never work. That won't work. Well, how do you know? Did you try it? Some cases you have, some cases you haven't. If you have, maybe it's a different scenario and it actually does work. We found that quite a lot. We also found that we have to reach out to other people. We can't just sit back and wait for somebody to come to us. We have to get outside of our echo chamber and go talk to folks who have the power, have the access, who are the ones who can actually influence and change things. We were really surprised, like I said, in the public policy folks that we ran into. They were very, very smart. Maybe weren't seeing things from our perspective, but at that point, you know, going back to the first bullet, it's just a matter of talking to them in a way that they can understand, and then all of a sudden they applied their logic to our problem, and we came to some really, really good conclusions. There was one conversation where we were talking to a public policy staffer and talking about the risks of medical devices and if somebody could get access and shut them down. And they asked, well, what about the Russian mob? Would they do that? It's like, well, no, probably not. And then they asked, well, what if they wanted to extort the hospital? It's like, huh. You know, that's a crimeware scenario that I haven't really heard, but it's not, you know, unreasonable to some degree. But at that point, they're coming up with those. They're able to take the knowledge that we've empowered them with, apply it to a new situation for them, and come up with some good ideas. It proves that they're thinking, that they're actually willing to make that stretch. In talking with the manufacturing industry, we got lots of contacts from folks who they've been saying some of these things inside the organization for years, sometimes, you know, more than 10 years. And we found that we could actually help them. Whenever some new medical device problem came out, they got money to go and fix that, right? To actually improve the problem. That was a really good thing. That was surprising to us. You know, we didn't necessarily think that there were the folks out there who were doing these things, but we found that they were fighting very valiantly in organizations, just like many of us have, but to no avail. So we were able to provide them air cover and support to get the things done that needed to be done. We also found that a lot of people really liked the mission. They liked the mission, they understood it, it was clear to them, and they could then understand why we were doing what we were doing, why we were talking about this, why it mattered to us. I think one of the problems that we have in this industry, too often we throw out the word vulnerability and exploit, and while we understand the impact of those, to the general public, they don't have that same level of understanding. They might understand it in a different way. Even though we all think we're speaking English, we're actually talking past each other. And so there's a lot of miscommunication. But when you talk about it in a clear, unambiguous language, then other people can understand it the same way that you do, at least from a high level, at least to the point where it gets them engaged and gets them to care. And then they invite you in. They ask you questions. Not just sit back and try and pay attention while you're putting them to sleep the way maybe a CPA would, an actuarial guy. And we found that one of the biggest opponents we have is giving ourselves permission to go out and do that. For a long time in this industry and in this community, we've been the outcasts of the business world, of the technology world. We've been the guys who are in the way, or the women who are in the way. But at this point, I think that the general public is willing to bring us in. We just have to give ourselves permission to allow that, to make a difference, to work with them, sometimes on their terms, sometimes on our terms, but we can't just give up. We can't say, well, they'll never listen. There was a good TED Talk done by Karen Elazari, and it was on hackers as the internet's immune system. She said when she was building up for that talk, she was afraid that the general public, the people sitting in the audience who were, you know, somewhat technology driven, a lot of them, that they would hate it. They would absolutely refuse to believe that hackers could be anything but bad. She said what she found when she got off stage is that everybody was highly receptive to that message, that they loved it, that they were we're asking for more. How can we get you guys more involved? How can we help you solve the problems that you're seeing out there? And then she took the same message to a group of security people. They said, oh, they don't listen. I don't believe what you said. So at DEF CON, she did a talk on giving yourself permission, on empowering hackers to change the world. It was a good talk. So what's the next year going to look like? Much, much better communication and transparency into what we're doing. Again, one of the criticisms that we got was that we weren't talking about the activities we were going through. We're actually planning on putting out a regular newsletter, a regular update, so that you can track it, so that you can see what we've been doing, so that you can hold us accountable. If we say we're going to do something, we need to do it because these are things that are important, right? And if it's important enough to do, it's important to track it. We want to have a much broader international reach. Being here at 44Con in London is great. Getting to talk to folks who may not have heard the message before, or being able to tailor our message differently to impact a different part of the world, making us all better from that reaching out and from getting more international. And we have more international trips planned, more international work planned as well. We want to provide more information so that security researchers and others can come and figure out themselves how to go and do something, so that we're not holders of the knowledge, keepers of the knowledge, or even seen as that. We want to be able to have people connect on their own, to just connect to each other spontaneously, to make good things happen without us having to be a bottleneck. We want to have one Cavalry Summit per year in each of the industries that we've outlined. Bring smart people together, the researchers and the industry people, and have them make those connections, talk things through. And we'd also like to have one event ourselves, so we can come together and say, all right, we hear what the industry press says. This is what you have to do, antivirus everything, firewall everything, IDS. But how do you have an IDS on a pacemaker? It doesn't work, right? So we've got to rethink what actually works and how to apply it to these new areas, so that when we get asked for our advice, we're able to give good, applicable, and reliable advice. And we're going to be filing a legal entity or become adopted by another entity that wants to bring in our mission into part of theirs. This allows us to get into other places. We'll file as a 501c3, which is a U.S. entity. It's basically a nonprofit educational institution or foundation. And it means that we'll have an independent voice, that then we're not representing a company, we're representing a group of security researchers, and hopefully the community. That allows us to be more trusted, more of a trusted advisor, and less of a kind of a jaundiced, like, what are you trying to sell me now? So the 5-star automotive cyber safety framework. Has anybody seen this? Anybody familiar with it? 3 folks, okay. So we published an open letter to the automotive industry, and our goal was to get them to, or our goal was to communicate that we recognize their safety record of innovations, right? If you look at airbags, if you look at backup cameras, if you look at adaptive cruise control, these are all safety innovations that are driven by connectivity and by computers. It's important to call that out, because I think that a lot of us in this room think that computers are always going to be a bad thing. They only put vulnerabilities into a system. Well, they do put vulnerabilities into a system, but they can also make the system safer. You just have to balance that. You have to make the vulnerabilities not as bad. At least get over the part of that that's an immediate negative response to new software going in somewhere. We also wanted to call on the automakers to publicly talk about what they're doing, as well as commit to safety in a way that allows people to buy smartly. So a lot of the automakers we found are doing really good things. Turns out they just don't talk about them much, because maybe they don't feel like it's a buying decision criteria, or they don't want to publish trade secrets. But it's about getting them to open up just a little bit, to give a peek into it. And the example we often cite is Tesla. They put out a coordinated disclosure policy. If you do research on their cars, you find bugs, you report it to them and give them the chance to fix it and work on it. they won't take you to court, right? They actually, at DEF CON, they've got a bug bounty. So, hey, go out and make yourself some money. Maybe make enough to afford to buy a Tesla to test. We also recognize that there are different domains of expertise at work here, right? There's the cybersecurity domain of expertise, but there's also the car maker domain of expertise. I don't know all the things that they've gone in and done to make these things safer, to make them more secure. The decisions that they've made to not connect multiple systems together because they're fighting hard against some of the security issues that we're fighting hard against. So how do we bring these two groups together so that we can support each other and go get through this with a better decision? And then to introduce the framework. So quickly, I'm just going to run through this. You can see lots more detail on the website, or we've got some documents out there. But we have 5 capabilities. And in the US, there's what we call a 5-star crash rating system. And they have different attributes as to whether you get a 1 versus a 5. But we wanted to call out specifically safety by design, to have a secure development lifecycle, to make sure that when you're going through the process of putting in something that's computerized and connected, that you're thinking through what that means so that you build it safely from the start. Third-party collaboration. How do you work with other people who report vulnerabilities and issues? And this is an important one, obviously, to us. It invites other contributors who find things to submit them, rather than being ostracized and trying to make those folks feel like they're doing bad things. They should be feeling like they're doing good things for reporting them in a coordinated manner so that they can get fixed, and understanding that they're willing allies, not adversaries. Having some form of evidence capture so that if the braking system fails, you know why it failed, right? It's not just a random spontaneous act. If it happened from a computer system or over the computer area, controller area network, you want to know that, right? So that the process can be fixed. Once you identify issues that need to be fixed, how do you fix them, right? So if you have, let's say, heart bleed in your braking system, you shouldn't have to replace the brakes to fix the heart bleed issue, right? You should be able to have some secure way to patch with full cryptographic signatures to make sure that the patch is what it's supposed to be. And how do you segment or isolate different systems from each other? Your radio should never be able to cause your airbags to go off. But if they're attached, there is always that possibility. And a lot of this work came from collaborations with other people. We talked to dozens of folks over several months. It wasn't just a bunch of ignorant security researchers sitting in a room writing things down that were pie in the sky dreams. We actually got to talk to automakers. We talked to people who have jobs in the auto industry who said, well, we can't really do this, but if you pitched it like that, that would be really good, and that is in line with some of the other initiatives in the industry. Oh, all right, we'll go back and rejigger this. We talked to policymakers who are really interested in something like this. They're always interested in self-regulation rather than imposing a new regulatory regime, because that's hard. They have to burn political capital. There's a new industry or a new organization that you've got to stand up. It's just a pain. So they always prefer something more like this, where you can get smart people from the industry in a room and solve their own problems. Then they don't have to worry about it. We talked to accident investigators. We talked to a lot of different people, standards organizations, about how do you do this the right way. So again, the point of this is not to belabor the fact that we talked to a lot of people. It's just to make sure everybody understands it was something that was a collaborative effort. And what we were really hoping to gain from this is just to address concerns of everybody in the room, to kind of bring these topics up and say, this is something worth talking about. Here's a start. Let's put it out there, see what happens. We got a lot of good feedback from a lot of manufacturers, from OEMs, people who were desperate to talk to us because they had been trying the same things, and this helped them do what they needed to do. And actually, some of these slides were created for a couple of car companies who specifically asked for a few very short slides that they could present to their executives internally to say, this is what we need to start doing. We also wanted, again, to call out the industry's practices of innovating safety over the last 50 years. It's not a new thing for them. They've been doing this a long time. So give them credit where credit is due. And again, work together with them to make sure that we come to the right solutions across a wide suite of vehicles, and then get just a wider adoption of cyber safety principles. And if you haven't already, you can go here, bit.ly/5starauto, and we have a petition on change.org. It's at 530 signatures, I think, something like that, somewhere around there, of folks, a lot of them from conferences that we've gone to talk to, as well as a lot of them from people who have seen this in newspapers or heard it on the radio, who have gone and signed it. Getting involved, I think one of the biggest things that I learned this year was that there were a lot of people who quit the job that they had to take a new job in an industry that was affected by these types of things. People went and worked for instance, the Mayo Clinic in the United States, to bring a good security research background into a buying organization of some of these technologies. That's great. People went to work for car makers. People changed their jobs from working in a healthcare organization where they couldn't do anything to security research groups where they had a strong background in finding flaws in medical devices, and now they're able to go out and do that not just for one organization, but for multiple organizations. Go in and look at target technology. So if you are already a security researcher, maybe instead of trying to find the next Android malware, you spend some time just poking around with a car system or a medical device or something else, something that maybe has a little bit more impact than credit card numbers or just commodity malware. That's always a good thing that people maybe overlook. I pitch it this way. It's probably going to take you an hour to find malware on Android, right? It's not hard. Then you're going to spend the next 2-3 weeks trying to justify why it's a big deal to the media group that you work with, to media outlets, to your boss, so you can work on it more. If you spend the same amount of time, you're probably going to find a vulnerability in a medical device, but at that point it's really apparent why that has an impact, right? So selfishly, you're just saving yourself a lot of the time that you'd have to spend trying to think up reasons to keep doing this, and people will, turns out, give you more stuff to work on if you're able to make that case. It's really, really easy. Go to events, talk about what you're doing, speak to not us in this room, but go to a car event if you're doing car research. If you're in the medical industry, go talk at a medical conference where maybe they haven't heard the security message or they haven't heard it in a way that makes sense to them, and just help educate folks. You can always join the discussion. We've got a discussion list up. It's a Google group, so you can go back and look at the archived emails. You can also sign up. It's a mailing list, so you'll get the emails as they come out. And then follow us on Twitter and give us feedback, either here in person, and I'll be around the rest of the week, or through email. It's a good way to reach us. And so part of the point of the Cavalry is just to kind of recognize that it's a personal responsibility, that each of us is the Cavalry, that we're not just security researchers, we're not just security folks, we're also a lot of other things. We also have other responsibilities. And those are the things that I think drive us all to want to achieve something that is good. We are powerful, we can carry a voice of reason, and we can be the Cavalry. So thank you very much.